Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about how these 5 spectacular sales leaders here increase quota attainment across their teams. Fewer and fewer reps on the average B2B sales team are hitting or meeting or exceeding quota in 2017 compared to 5 years ago. I think, Chris from Gong gave us the stat here that 63% in 2011 are hitting their quota compared to 50%, only 50% in 2017. So obviously a lot of variables with, the way that the market has, moved in the past 6 years. But we're going to go into some of the ways and some of the questions, that you have as you, ask in the question and answer panel, into, how to make sure your team hits and exceeds quota. So we have Jamison Young, VP of Sales at Gong here. We have Preston Clark, President EverFi here. We have Tony Bennett, VP of Sales at Terminus here, and we have Derek Grant, VP of Commercial Sales at SalesLoft as well. And we're gonna kick it off real quick. We're gonna get straight to the meat. You probably know a lot of these panelists here. They are contributors to Sales Hacker, contributors and other publications and webinars and podcasts all over for the more knowledgeable people that I know in B2B sales. And let's get it kicked off real quick. Preston, you're up first. As sales leaders, what's your take on this problem? How would you deconstruct this problem into its components and parts?
Thanks, Max. So I guess to your point about, going back to 2011, and I don't want to be sort of contrarian on the core thesis of how do we optimize and how do we get more than, 50% or 70% or 80% of our reps hitting or exceeding quota. But I think there's been a lot of ambition and aspirational goals set, over the last several years. And I think that the market expectations are we sign up for numbers because there's growth expectations. And, I think all the way back to sort of, benefits of just like, what happens if we would just double the number? Well, maybe we should just triple the number and we'll just hire 100 SDRs and make it work. And so I think that in terms of sort of deconstructing the problem, Max, is foundationally understanding how your business thinks about lead velocity and pipe velocity over historical month over month, so that when you're signing up for the goals to begin with, that there's a historical path to it, even though we're always going to have to stretch beyond that. It's never going to be so prescriptive that we're just saying, this is the track and there'll be no more quota subscribe to it. So I think from our perspective, we try to take a lot of discipline at EverFi in terms of forecasting as it relates to both historical and aspirational, as we're thinking about adding product layers and adding headcount and having coverage so that we're backing into our number, both from an SDR and an account executive perspective. But the fact remains, and why I'm so excited about this webinar today, that whatever it is, whatever we end up signing up for, at some point, there's no world in which any of us succeed with 50% of our team hitting quota. And so whatever we sign up for, this thing's got to work, and we have to make the numbers work, and that means optimizing for performance. And so I don't want to go too deep, because that opening question, I could go down all the paths and the follow-up questions that are to come. But I think what we try to focus on the most is how we build our teams, coach our teams, train our teams by cohort, so that we're looking at SMB and identifying what they should be focused on, what skill set we're trying to impart to them, whether it's prospecting or just shortening the sales cycle or establishing the value prop, and then all the way up to enterprise and strategic accounts, where the game is much, much different, but we still need a level of predictability so that we can hit those goals in all the ways that our top line revenue number is dependent on it. So I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot to talk about here today.
I agree with Preston. I think the issue of why reps aren't hitting quota is pretty complex, and it can be very different per organization. But It seems like onboarding, coaching, and training, especially in fast growth software companies, is a huge challenge. And I'm facing it myself here at Terminus. I've got 18 account executives on board. My last class was 6 new hires. It started December 1st. So we're in the end of Q4 trying to close a lot of revenue while trying to onboard 6 new reps. And I think it's difficult primarily because of bandwidth to slow down enough to give your reps the attention they need. So I think often it's an unintentional thing that sales leaders do, and getting sidetracked with lots of other things and letting, especially I think we've done onboarding pretty well, not perfect, but it's been the ongoing training and really coaching that's been difficult. And some of the things that I've learned is, one, learning styles. I used to try to teach everybody the same way that I learned. So I like to write things up on a whiteboard and kind of map it out. I'm very visual. But there was one person in particular I was really struggling to have breakthroughs with. And I realized this particular person was just totally different. They did not like to be put on a spot with a role play. They were very internal and needed to have information in written form and needed to sit with it for like a week and digest it. But then when this person would go and execute it on the phone, they would do it to perfection because they had to like practice. So I think lack of slowing down enough to understand the learning styles of the people that we're coaching, and then trying to do too much group training where we're getting everybody together in one group and expecting them all to retain it. I got so frustrated when I started in sales leadership that I would do this training session and half the team wouldn't even do the thing. And I would just be like pulling my hair out, and then realize people really need that one-on-one time for you to specifically help them understand how to put this thing in action. So yeah, I think, training, onboarding, and really one-on-one coaching is the biggest reason why reps don't hit quota. And I think it's tough because the managers are responsible for so many parts of sales leadership, from managing the number and executive meetings to other things. But I think it comes down to coaching.
I want to be the amen pew here. I'll give an amen to Preston. Territories are getting smaller, numbers are getting bigger, and that's the way that businesses are grown. You've got to make the bottoms up and the top down align, and a lot of times there's a lot of aspiration inside of those. But then to Tony's part, I think it's getting away from the fundamentals. So let's assume that gravity is that the patches will be smaller and the number will be higher. That is the way that high growth businesses work. It's the fundamentals, right? We've got people drinking from a fire hose. We bring them in, we give them 2 weeks in sales onboarding, and there's just no way they're going to take it all in. And then we immediately arm them with a bunch of tools and pat them on the back, give them a hearty handshake, and tell them to go out and make the number. And there's a lot of gap there that can occur. Yeah, so at our upcoming Rainmaker conference, we're going to be talking about emerging trends in B2B sales. And I'm going to have Craig Rosenberg and Richard Harris on with me, and we were doing some prep for it, just kind of get some ideas out there. And I was like, people want to know about like what the emerging tech is or the new channels, and both of them, great, brilliant minds, said it is about fundamentals. It isn't about another thing that we need to give them. It is about going back, and it is about coaching, and it is about onboarding. It is about intentionality. It is about measurement. And it's those sorts of things that I think so often get missed as we buy these 12 different things that a rep's supposed to use, give them 30 minutes of onboarding from some sort of a person during enablement, and then expect good things to happen. So my takeaway is bigger quotas, smaller patches, enablement matters, and I think we're all doing a fair to mediocre job at it. And no matter how good you're doing, there's always room to do more.
I was hoping we were just going to all agree that quotas were too high and move on, but it sounds like we think there's a bigger problem here. No, I mean, I think it even goes, I agree with everything, and I think it even goes back to, if you look at the time that people have in roles, like you look at the time that salespeople are in sales roles today, you look at the time that a sales leader is in a sales role today, everybody is looking for quick wins. That's what you kind of need, and so you always hope you can just hire some plug-and-play rep that, you do like Derek said, the 2 weeks of onboarding, the product training, and you send them out and they just close deals for you, and you get to focus on other things, and get to focus where I think a lot of leaders like to spend their time, which is kind of deal management and being part of the sales cycle. And I think it pulls people away from investing time into people and doing the longer term play for their success, which is ultimately coaching, like Tony was talking about, which is a very different process. It's one-on-one. It's not necessarily deal specific. It's trend specific, and it takes a lot more thought and a lot more time. And I don't think, unfortunately, we myself as well always invest the time that we need to in that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of laziness involved too. I mean, to Derek's point, it's not about more technology, and the fact that there is more technology that exists that is there to automate certain processes. Yeah. I think when it comes to coaching and training, there's a laziness, factor there, because it's like, oh, well, the technology is going to make up for that. So it's like a company that raises too much money. It's like now they can be lazy about things, and they don't have to be, hardcore, disciplined about things because they have this extra cash to spend, and then they go and screw themselves because they get lazy about it. Well, if you have this technology that you think is going to back you up, then you don't train your reps really well. Then you go out and you get, let's say sales loft to send emails faster and better, and next thing you know, you got these, untrained reps sending out emails, and they're sending out more emails, but they're not necessarily better because you got lazy on the training because you thought you had this technology to back you up. So there is that downside of proliferation of all these different technologies that you can add to your stack. And moving on to, the next point. Yeah, go for it.
One thing I was going to say is all the tools that purport to drive efficiency for reps, without a foundational bedrock of actual good messaging, good understanding, knowing the ICP, what you're doing is accelerating a broken message out into the world. And so effectively you're making it worse. Buying technology that is helping reps be in more places when they don't have the right words to say when they get there is exacerbating the problem.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So going into the meat a little further, Preston, we're going to start with you here, but when the percentage of the reps on your team, attaining quota starts to decline, what are the first things that you look at? What do you want to fix first?
Sure, and I suspect Derek has a more insightful answer on this than I do, but I think I want to bring up the point that for us, and this may be dissimilar from the rest of you all, and maybe from folks on the phone on the call too, but like our business, like we don't sell to salespeople, right? We sell to HR, we sell to legal. EverFi is the largest provider of sexual harassment training in the world. So you can imagine our phone is just burning off the hook, like more leads, more inbound, but not all leads are created equal. Not all segments are created equal. Our ACV target, our industry target, we don't do as well in manufacturing as we do in tech. Enterprise sales cycles for a certain pocket are perfect. You get into strategic, we're like 40% perfect, and 60% it's outside our sweet spot. And so a lot of the designing, to answer your question, Max, for us is really scrutinizing where our efficiencies are. So when we design territories and segment the team, we're putting people in the right pockets for success based on whether it's ICP, to Derek's point, or just where we have the most superior product market fit. And so we tend to, whenever we see a pattern, certainly I'm going to put pressure on the VPs of sales to make sure that everyone is being optimized, but also more foundationally making sure that we haven't sort of like oversubscribed one area or we're focusing folks. And so, Derek, to your point, like the messaging has to be right, the thesis has to be right, but also like we need to know where the no's should come and where to redirect resources as needed.
Max, when you were coming on the webinar and you were asking if they had tech companies in Miami, you said something that offended me. You said, go Canes, and I have a 7-year undergrad degree from Florida State University, a party school, yes. But, when I think about reps having declined, when I think of decline,
UM baby.
Oh, man. Oh, geez Louise. That's the worst. I love Miami grads. Miami fans are the worst. But with that said, it's a math equation that even a Florida State guy can do. I think it's the KPIs. When you start to see the depreciating returns, it's going back and digging back in. Inside sales is a math equation. It is number of touches. It is conversion rates. It is yield. It's those things. And so I think so often people are looking at, and we see this a lot, particularly with our younger managers on the SDR side, they want to fix the team. And it's like, it's not a fix the team sort of thing. Sales teams are like offensive baseball. You're each doing an individual feat, which is tallied together. And so it's the idea of like, has one rep, are they making a lot of calls, but they can't get anyone on the phone? Is someone else getting a lot of people on the phone? They couldn't close a door. And so it's figuring out exactly where the breakdown in that conversion rate is. And it's just being objective. Daniel Pink in Drive talks about more than 5 KPIs and everything is important, therefore nothing is. And so we like to think in terms of total number of calls, total number of conversations, dissect that into a connect rate, number of conversions, and number of show-ups. Like, I mean, you can take an SDR and look at them just on those 5 metrics and figure out if they're good with the words, bad with the words, calling all the wrong people, calling all the right people, because conversion rate will go up and down, connect rate will go up and down. And so I think so often it's just going in, being intentional, digging into each individual person and thinking about the numbers and then going in and coming with a plan to be able to resolve that.
Yeah, so, building on top of that, Derek, so what do you believe most young sales leaders, what are the mistakes they make when, numbers are slipping?
Knee-jerk, one-size-fits-all sorts of things. You've heard Tony, you've heard Jameson say it. I mean, it's as much about coaching the individual as it is waving a wand over the entire team and giving some prescriptive answer. But it takes time and it takes cycles. But, we on a weekly basis have each SDR tell me those numbers individually for their team, and it allows us to go in and say, look, connect rate's a little low, more calls is probably in order. Wow, they're incredible with the words. Their conversion rate is off the charts. How do we get them to teach a class? And it's going in and looking at each person individually, because it is not, sales is not a team sport. It is tallied as a team, but it really is an individual feat that each and every person does. So I think fixing people individually drives efficiencies for the team.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, Derek. I think that where you see people make mistakes initially is that they assume that some theme of a problem applies to every single person in the exact same way. Or digging into activity, I see that a lot, right? Like your close rates are super low, so now you have to develop 3 times as much pipeline, at least in the short term, until we fix this close rate problem, instead of digging in on what might be the actual gap. And actually, I also love your point on figuring out what other people in the team have the strength where that gap might be, starting to do some of the pairing up and allowing some of the messaging not necessarily having to come from you.
Question? Anything to add to that?
Tony?
Sure. The only thing I'd add to that is being too negative too quickly. I've seen people immediately get aggressive with their rep and start treating them in a way as if, they just will never come back from it. And so I think the approach is, of course, individualistic, but knowing your reps. And is this the kind of person who's so hard on themselves? If I'm hard on them, are they just going to get deeper in this hole of negativity? So I had a rep recently who was not performing, and I stayed extremely positive with this person because I knew he was very, very hard on himself. And afterwards, he was like, I almost thought you were trying some kind of weird mind trick on me because I was not performing. I knew I was starting to be on the chopping block, but I really appreciate the positivity. And other people, if they need extra motivation, that's where you kind of have to kick them in the butt. So I think, knowing when to push and when to soften a little bit and be understanding with them to give them the time they need to make up the gap.
Max, sorry, just real quick, one thing on that too is I think when we feel as individual contributors, when we feel the pressure of quota slipping and we're starting to worry about our jobs and everything else and panic sets in, it's how can I self-help? Because not every rep is going to self-help, but what are the resources? And I will say, to plug Gong for a second, Kevin Shirley on our team runs enablement, manages the SMB team, and he runs programs on Gong. And so you have reps who are in that position who have a track of education that they can spend the time, whether it's on the weekends or after hours or whenever, learning the craft so that it's not just, what do I do? Do I make 100 more phone calls? It's actually, no. How do you go back into the well to get better at this?
Well, and there's skill and will, right? And so you think about it, a lot of times people can show the will. And, Jameson, to your point, tell them to make 500 more calls. They may have the will to do that, but there's a skill sharpening component in there. Otherwise, they are out, and we talked about earlier, they're accelerating a bad message and a bad image of your brand out into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Tony, subconsciously or consciously in your last, answers for the last two questions, you brought up some points that, on coaching that are fairly interesting and maybe a topic for a future webinar. But, in the first one, you were talking about how people learn differently. So obviously people learn by doing, seeing, and hearing, are the three main buckets. And in this question, you went into approaching the rep from a perspective of, understanding the EQ side of things and saying, all right, well, this person's not going to respond well to negativity. I need to come from a positive perspective to coach this person. And so it's a really, like Jedi mind trick. It's really interesting to hear where that fits into this, entire equation in terms of coaching, where it's like, when you get a new cohort of people and you're training them, are you understanding who learns by doing, seeing, hearing? Are you understanding how to coach these people based on the type of personalities that they have? And I think that goes a long way in making sure that your team is going to, hit quota attainment along the way. But a little bit of a tangent there. We'll keep going here. Performance bell curve question. So some sales leaders think you should invest more time in the middle of the pack. Agree or disagree, and why? And Jameson, we're going to start with you.
I actually think that a lot of sales leaders end up investing their time at the bottom of the pack and the C players. I wish everybody would invest more time in the middle of the pack. I think that's where you can probably make the biggest influence there. And obviously, I think A players tend to get ignored too, and those tend to be people that want more attention, and they don't necessarily get it because they tend to be performing well, and then you focus your attention elsewhere. I absolutely agree that we should put more focus in the middle of the pack. I think by default, people tend to put more focus on the C players. And when Derek started talking about like skill versus will, I think, when it comes to thinking about people that aren't doing as well, I think the first is to see if the will is there, and then you can develop the skill. But in the B players, you have at least a little bit of both, and a little tweak can go such a long way with that group. Yeah,
I would mostly agree. I think the B performers are a great place to start and to put a lot of time and energy into. The way that I look at the B performers group is these should be my future A performers and these that aren't. So the skill versus will thing that you brought up, Derek, I don't know if you've been through this whole seminar on the balance of it, but one that I sat through talks about how if you don't work with a B performer, they become a C performer, and often if you don't work with an A performer, they become someone with very high skill but very low will and often become a negative influence. So I think A players and B players are where we should really focus. I think to the point you just made, Jameson, a lot of times we want to leave the A players alone. Again, with me, I've got 18 reps on board. It's so tempting to just focus on the newer hires. I've got people who are consistently hitting their number, and it's tempting to leave them alone. But usually they're the ones who want the most coaching. They're the ones who want to be invested in. And if you don't, I think you risk losing them because they're the ones who are getting bored in their role. The rep who leaves your company because they feel like they're not challenged anymore. So we try to make sure we're investing heavily in the A players too, finding ways to go deeper with them in coaching. Those coaching sessions just look very different. And then C players, for me, most of mine, I've got a newer team. It's mostly worked out for me that my A and B players, the ones who have been in the organization for the longest, those I would consider C are new, and usually we weed them out pretty quickly. Either you become a B player and you're on your way up, or you're on your way out. So we don't tend to keep them for very long.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that? I think you're up on the what could a B player be do to be turned into an A player, and then furthermore, how do you attempt to get your B players to learn from those A players?
I'll tell you some things that we've done internally. It's about being asynchronous. As much as we talk about coaching and it being an individual endeavor, we've actually done some things that are group learning. I remember way back in the day, I used to do pipeline reviews in public with all the reps there because by the time I got to the third or fourth rep, they could answer the questions the first or second rep couldn't. And so there is something to be said for group instruction. So we have a weekly, we call it Point and Laugh at a Closer. we will watch a meeting, whether it is from a competitor, whether it is one where a particular talk track was really used super effectively. But we go and we want to show those off and then let the rep go and answer questions, and really we are perpetually stopping the tape and saying like, hey, why didn't you do this? Or foreshadowing, you're going to go here. And it allows them all to see how we're thinking about it. And then also we do weekly call coaching as well on a individual rep basis. And that's something that way back in the day at Pardot that Tony's original manager, Jordan Rackey, who's now the VP of sales over, I forget where QA, thank you, that he used to do, and he would individually do call coaching with them because it just helped them get better as well. But I think it's both one-on-one and then group-led instruction that can help those folks be able to raise their game, because a lot of times it's a messaging gap. A lot of times it's them not spending enough time on the practice range, so to speak, and so you can help accelerate that and help them grow faster than their experience by not having them have to trip up on something, but rather see another rep who's either handled it well or learn from a rep who actually fell on their face and they know now not to try that move.
Something we've been doing is we'll pair up. So we use Gong heavily where managers lead coaching sessions, but we realized over time the team was really craving feedback from each other. So every week now we pair up 2 different reps. Sometimes it'll be a group of 3, but usually 2 reps, often a newer and a more tenured hire, but it can always vary, and have them listen to one of each other's calls for the week and then share feedback with each other. The team has loved it. So one, I think you have to have a pretty collaborative team from the beginning with our group. In training, we put our reps on the spot a lot. We encourage them to say things out loud and that this is a safe space. No one's going to make too much fun of you for saying something stupid on the phone. We all do. We wouldn't be salespeople if we didn't give you a little bit for it. But anyway, I think the switching of that, so it's not just the manager, it's also helped us to scale coaching. I don't have the bandwidth to listen to as many calls as I'd like, although I try to do bi-weekly sessions with the 6 that directly work with me. So getting them to do coaching with each other has been huge for us.
Yeah. And Preston, you want to tell us a little bit of how, you work with C players? So is it possible to get?
Why do I get the C player question?
You picked it. I don't know. It's on the dot. I'm just reading off the teleprompter over here. So how do you turn C players into B and potentially A players? And audience is wondering how much time do you give them before you cut the cord, so to speak?
None. No, so I just to define terms for a second, obviously we talk about, you can read Harvard's Business Review on sort of A players and the importance of B players, but we're building sales organizations, and there's this idea that if what we're defining is that every brand new rep who's unramped is defined as a C player, then those people, to Tony's point, need to be moved up the ramp, and that some are going to make it and some aren't, and as soon as you can identify the ones who can't, you give them the support that they need if they're putting the effort there, getting back to will and skill. And if it's some threshold, if they're not there, then you move them out. So we think about it the same way. I think for us, it's really understanding that the new folks need time to ramp. They need the coaching. They need the support. As Derek, I like the terms you're using at the beginning is you sort of throw me in, coach, and you're ready to go. You give them a handbook and you say, go hit your quota. You have to give more support than that. But I think, Max, just as a general statement, I think a lot of VPs of sales, and I've been guilty of this, we fall in love with this idea of look at my sales floor, look at my tribe. It's 200 people, it's 50 people, and we're like, this is power, this is revenue. And it's like, man, if I can have 5 people crushing it, I'm good. I would much rather have a high-performing team than a big team. And so really being disciplined and saying, yes, this group needs to grow. It needs to grow from 5 to 20 to 50 to whatever, but it has to happen. We have to build a framework and a structure to onboard and scale. And the C players, as defined new players, need to be given a lot of rigor about what success looks like at day 90, at day 120, because this is the last thing I'll say, my greatest goal or my greatest wish is, and I know it's not this simple, is for at day 180 for all the C players to walk in with their resignation letters and say, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I understand that I didn't make the cut, and I know that the person to my right did and the person to my left did, and I understand why they did, and I understand we were all given an equal opportunity. And it's not that clean. Like, there's so much nuance, there's so much complexity behind that, but my goal is to make sure that there's a true path for those who have both the will and the skill.
Yeah, and I guess when I think about C players, I think about, yes, most people new are C players. I also think of the people that are struggling that are new are really the Cs, because if they're not following the path of kind of where everybody else is ramping, that's somewhere that's a C player that I want to make sure to focus energy. I think of a rep I had that ended up turning one of my best reps and one of my best managers. Started off having really tough, probably 3 or 4 months of their ramp, and you could tell a lot of things were going right, but it just wasn't connecting. And I think you spend a good amount of time there, but it goes back to, I only spend time there if time's being spent the other way, right? If there isn't the will to do what it takes, and you're gonna have to do more than what everybody else around you is gonna have to do, and do that in the short term without me having to look over your shoulder. If that isn't there, then I will quickly on-invest time. But I think, to Tony's point, you need to make sure you're delivering that message in the right way, because you could have somebody that's willing to do that, willing to put the time in, and if you ask the wrong way or have that conversation the wrong way, it can, push them out the door.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your onboarding strategy, Jameson. How are you getting these guys up to speed and up to quota?
I think a couple of things that are really important when you think about onboarding strategy is like how you set quota. I think it's a double-edged sword. There's two things that really hurt you when people are ramping. One is if they don't have success early and they get discouraged. It's really hard to dig somebody out of that hole. The other side is when someone does really well really quick and gets almost overconfident. I've seen that be the death of people as well, where now they think they got the sales pitch down, they had a ramping quota that they were destroying, and now all of a sudden they have a full quota and they're struggling, and they thought they were doing it right, and now you have someone that's once again kind of thought they figured it out. Now they didn't figure it out, and it puts them in a bit of a hole. Yeah. So I think it's really important to start by looking at your quotas. After that, as people are having challenges, and there's always 1 month that's like the challenging month for people to hit. I feel like, for us, it's the 3rd month is when your quota gets difficult, and I think that's more of the proving point. The first couple months, you should be able to hit it. And the way I handle it is a couple different ways. One is obviously making sure that people are pacing, and I do a lot of stuff for pairing people, where as you're starting to see where people are struggling, where other people are strong, leaning on some of the team to help out with, why don't you work with this person? And I feel like that goes a long way as well.
Anyone else want to chime in on that one?
Something I realized is we were giving them way too much information during onboarding. Similar to Derek, if we had a 2-week onboarding, and so I've been at Terminus for almost 3 years. Our product has changed drastically, our industries, new talk tracks, and we're still doing a 2-week onboarding, but we're fitting in 4 times as much info. And I think I really had that the last training class before this most recent one, when I realized they just couldn't retain it all. They were kind of disasters on certain things that were more advanced skill set. And I realized, why am I training them this on week 2? They're not going to use this information for 4 more weeks. So I haven't perfected it yet. We're hiring an enablement person who's going to come in and help me to get this organized, but we need to do a little bit less up front in month 1 and have more structured training in month 2, 3, and 4 on some of those other skills.
Yeah, I think the classic one is we give competitive intel on week 2. They're still 2 weeks away from mastering the demo and us giving them anyone who would even remotely be qualified. And so all of that falls out of their brains, and they're like a deer in the headlights as soon as they first see competition. And so it's but I think most companies do that, right? I think we all want them to know all the things, but it's the appropriate delivery from a timing perspective of information that can help them be better and more successful at their jobs.
And Derek, what kind of sales training programs have worked for you in the past then? What's worked, what hasn't worked?
I can tell you that years and years ago at Pardot, we were going to do some outsourcing of our lead generation, and they sent over a list where we need to know all these different things about your business so we can present your business. And so it led me to create in all three of the tech stops I've been in a sales playbook, because my thought is if I'd have to explain that to someone who doesn't know our product, I need to be explaining this to new hires. But a huge gap in that is that I didn't I didn't make the content super engaging. It was just basically the playbook, and it was sort of going over the parts of the playbook and ad-libbing parts of it. It wasn't interactive. We didn't do a lot of quizzes. We didn't give at-home readings. And so we've added more things to that as we built out more of a training schedule. And now we're blessed to have a gentleman named Sean Fowler from IBM who's running enablement for us, who's going to take it from 2 weeks to 3 weeks to an ongoing lather, rinse, repeat training sort of culture. But I think the thing that I've found that's worked out of the gate is get it all on paper. It's cathartic. And once you've got it all on paper, then have everyone sing off that sheet of music. Even if it is not pitch perfect, it is certainly better than whatever they're going to come up with on day 8. What they think the company does, it's going to be dramatically better than that. And so getting it out on paper is the first part. I think then it's create great content. Then I think it's test for competency. Then I think it's give them ancillary readings, because you want to be hustling right out of the gate. And so I think those are some of the big things that they can truly do to be able to get started out of the gate.
And are you doing, it's all internal resources? I mean, we have a question here from the audience that wants to know, the materials used to train people, is it everything that you've built in-house, or there are external resources? Do you make them read certain books? Anything else?
Max, I am the smartest person on earth, and so of course it all comes directly from my fingers into the keyboard. No, I love them reading industry stuff. I'm a big fact-based seller guy, and so I truly think it's the best. But if I can find Topo, who said that we're number 1 in email, number 1 in phone, and I can have them read that analyst report and be able to then use that as a piece of content in their sales cycle, if I can go and find the Aberdeen report that said the best-in-class companies think about cloning their best reps, and that aligns to our value prop, I feel like them reading that stuff is more powerful. I think it's more impactful than anything we could totally come up with together. But I think ICP, messaging, way we use CRM, features and benefits, pains we solve, elevator pitch, mission statement, all these things are things that are curated internally.
Yeah. Okay.
There's another one that I've found. I agree that the third-party stuff is really helpful. And I also think just hearing that I found successful is hearing from customers how we're helping really early on. And starting with the customer story, starting with how are we helping, and then starting to go into what we do. Because one of the biggest challenges is, especially with new hires, is people not really tying to value and people getting down into the product that they're just learning themselves. And I found that helps if they start with the why, essentially, right? The books start with the why. And then start going into the how later.
Okay. And Tony, coaching. So, we went off on a tangent earlier about some of the things that I thought was interesting about what you're saying when it came to coaching. How are you approaching coaching? Let's go deeper into that. What are your tactics, processes? What does that look like? And we actually have a question from the audience. They want to know more specifically, how do you keep people organized?
All right. Two kind of different things. I'll try to talk about both. So this is an area where I have lately really been nerding out, getting really in the weeds with reps, trying to figure out how to best coach. And I think we're still not doing it perfectly over here, but we've had a lot of learning. So the way that I approach it with each rep, I think it's tempting. Gong is a great tool to listen to a call and just go in and rip it apart. But if you give people too many things, they're overwhelmed. If there's not one central message, it's hard to see if they're really improving. So what we've done is try to slow down and pick a topic or two for a month or a quarter and focus on that. So we do bi-weekly coaching sessions with every rep. So what I do is look at a mix of 3 key factors, look at their pipeline and certain trends. Is there a certain area where their conversion rate is lower than the team or where they seem to be having trouble? We look at Insights Squared and Salesforce for that information. I will then also, I'm listening to so many calls, I'll hear their calls from the month or quarter before, and so I'll have some kind of insight of my own, and then I ask the rep, what do you think you need to work on? Where do you want to focus? And so I take those 3 things and figure out where do we want to focus, and I get their buy-in that it's a topic or 2 topics that they want to work on. So I'll give you an example. One of my reps was an SDR promotion. He's been on the job for probably 3 months. So came to us with a lot of terminus knowledge, but not a lot of sales knowledge. So he said, I want to work on negotiation. And I said, Reese, I think we need to work on some of the fundamentals. He said, no, I want to work on negotiation. So I said, send me a call where you're negotiating. So he sends me a call with a negotiation that went it was a bit of an awkward call. You know, he came to me admitting this and said, how do I make this better? So this was like a call 5. So I went back in Gong and found all the calls in that series, listened to all 5 of them. I said, okay, Reese, before we get to this call on negotiation, let's go back to call 1. We talked through the information he learned from discovery. Hey, I noticed you didn't really use this information in a compelling way on call 2, 3, 4, or 5. You've lost a lot of leverage by not using this information to really outline the pain points, the challenges they're having, and therefore their objective and how Terminus can help them receive the desired outcome. So that's step number 1. Then we went to call 2. He's working with a manager level person. At the end of call 2, when it comes to next steps, we train the team. And this goes back to my point about group training that people can't absorb if you don't work with them and show them how to apply it. This is where they need to try to get multi-threaded in the account. He was so excited by the way the conversation went, he didn't ask, hey, who else needs to be involved in this conversation? So after we find that if we don't ask by the end of call 2, we have a much harder time getting upstream in the account if we don't do it early. So now he's negotiating with a manager level person who does not make the decision at the end of the day. Then we skip ahead to kind of call 5 where the negotiation happened and just kind of noted that he's negotiating himself out of the deal. He's negotiating before knowing all the details. Has this company decided that they're going to move forward with Terminus, and are they going to do so in the next 30, 45 days? Because if not, why are we negotiating terms? So it is kind of like going back to the basics that I wanted to cover, but still getting to what he wanted to cover, but making sure there's a theme and I'm not just picking a random call 2 and just breaking it apart. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't think I answered the second question, but maybe someone else can take that.
Who else wants to chime in on that one? Or did Tony cover it? All right, Derek, we're going to you. What are the keys to effective coaching?
You know, as much as I'd love to tell you that it's listening to all of every call, you'll quickly find yourself being sucked into Gong TV, and it's almost like Netflix. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're watching another, and you crawl out a few days later, you've got Cheetos all over you, 3-day beard. It just like it can really become sort of a space-time continuum. So something we've done is we've picked a particular part of the calls, and then whenever we've had managers go back and listen to them, we've used Google Forms to be able to annotate the things that we wanted to get. So like a first call certification deck. All right, we got everyone certified. Do we feel like they're delivering it effectively? What are the things that they're saying? What slide did they make it through? When did they flip to the meeting? How much time was taken? And so it isn't always about linearly going from the beginning of a call to the end of a call. I think that it's important to go in, pick a point, and to Tony's idea, you don't want to just randomly be like, what call do you want to listen to? Because that thing could go any number of directions. You want to say, like, great, let's focus in on this, or let's look at the close, or let's go in. Something I've got now is competitive mention report through Gong, which is really, really powerful, and I can see which calls have competitors in it. So I literally, when I get the report in the morning, I'll go and grab the rep and say, like, tell me what happened here. I want to get a feel for sort of what was being said, what you said, what went well, what didn't. Can I jump on the next call? But I think it's not about trying to solve for all the things and boil the ocean. I think it's picking a few places where you feel they're highly leveraged and then being able to really double down on those. And it gives you the leader control over the things that you think are most important. But I think it also then helps the team perform more consistently and holistically.
I actually think that's one of the challenges when you listen to calls is you just want to make all these comments and give all this feedback, right? And you look like, one, no one can absorb all of it, and 2, you look like you're picking them apart, and none of it's going to be helpful. So a lot of times I end up making a lot of the things that I'm writing private to myself, or some of them individual just to reps, so that I can decide when we actually sit down and have a conversation, I don't forget everything that I said, and we don't have to listen to an entire call again. But I could be like, okay, I want to narrow in on this point and this point.
Okay, awesome. And then Preston, we're getting close to the end here, but biggest mistake sales leaders make when it comes to coaching?
Sure. So I think I think Tony's way better at coaching than probably we are, and maybe everyone on this call is. But I think we know what we're supposed to do, and I think we're still getting better at it. I think we are an education company, so we think always in terms of primary education and just-in-time learning. And I think to Tony's earlier point, the idea that we tend to try to cram too many objectives in, whether it's the first 2 weeks of onboarding, or let's do a session that's an hour long that has 18 learning objectives, none of which the team walks away with any actionable next steps on. So how we try to think about it is, what are the biweekly or monthly training activities that we can do to follow a primary education program for the quarter or for the year, and really as a leadership team lock into the why of that, understanding that a lot of this, your team's going to come in and say, I know this already. And it's like, yeah, of course you do. Sit down and we're going to talk about it, because the reinforcement becomes really important. And then I think to the point that other folks were making, I think you do that, but then you may forget that the A, B, and C player coaching that happens just in time is almost like training someone how to both do the sales pitch and objection and rebuttal. Like, you have to know the pieces that come up in real time and to be able to work with your team. And I think where we struggle the most is how you do that at scale, right? Because if everyone is having little learning opportunities every single day, I don't think we're great at that, just to be honest with you. Like, I think that there's probably 15 reps on our team right now that would like 30-minute sessions on varying topics. And I think we're not perfect or even close at addressing those in a scalable fashion.
To Preston's point, I think so often that urgent trumps important. And so coaching is one of those things that looks like a nice to have, and the facts are it's something that is critical. Unless you want to see this revolving door of reps coming in, leaving, losing momentum, having, you've got a full year of quota that you're filling half the time because of 2 ramps that happened in the single calendar year. I mean, it is one of those things that if it's prioritized, then it can be impactful. But I think a lot of times the thing that's on fire sometimes trumps figuring out where all the fires keep coming from.
I agree, and I think it's a mistake to something that we struggle with a lot. So the amount of coaching and listening to calls that we do is really hard, and it's also sometimes the least sexy part of the job. Some days I'm not in the mood to listen to 2 hours worth of calls. I think it's just really easy to not do, and it really just takes a discipline. Like, a sales rep needs to do the discipline of putting the stuff in Salesforce. I think the biggest mistake is not just making the time. I block it off on my calendar. I don't let people interrupt it. It's very hard to do, but I think it's really critical. And also, I've realized I am a much better sales leader the more calls I hear. I know what the trends are in the market. I am hearing calls across 18 reps. I'm learning fast. So I hear 6 reps try the same objection handling across 2 or 3 weeks. I now have a new training session I can take to the whole team. Hey guys, so-and-so just try this. It worked really well. Can you 5 try this? If you try it and it works really well, let's give it to the whole team. In fact, you can run that training session since you helped me to prove this theory. And so it's hard to make time for, but I think it's the most important thing, at least for me in my day-to-day job.
That's good.
Excellent. So we're coming on to the end of the hour here. Last question, a little lightning round style. We'll go Tony, Derek, Preston, Jameson. Coaching tech stack. What do you got? What are you using?
Obviously, a lot of info is in Salesforce. We use Insight Squared on reporting to figure out where to coach, and I would say Gong is the primary that we use, which of course helps us to record calls, listen to those calls, make notes, share them amongst the team.
Yep. Same for us, Salesforce, Gong. We have gotten a lot of value out of Google Forms to be able to capture specific information around targeted coaching. And then, we've used group meetings, not necessarily part of the tech stack, but as a way to be able to communicate that asynchronously. Something really nice is their library feature. And so that's been a powerful part to help people as they're onboarding, be able to hear something that is good and is meaningful that they can then replicate when they first get on the phones.
Exactly the same. I think we use all 4, including Google Forms, from how we update the buyer journey documents so that the resources that the team can use are relevant, so that we're putting highlights in there of new trends or new learnings or new example pitches that we think people should listen to. But Gong is probably the newest piece. I think we're sort of at month 3, and it's truly, this is not a plug, like it's changing how we think about training, because we have this live and dynamic experience that everyone can, on their own time and a part of a team, take advantage of.
Tech stack, same as all you guys mentioned. I think one that's not tech stack that I think is really important that we use on the team is do a lot of roundtable discussion and use different information as a catalyst for it, like collect things on Google Forms, and then we all sit down in a room and kind of knock through it. Not technical at all, but I think an important thing to mention.
Awesome. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Where can people find you guys, if they want to keep in touch? Derek, Preston, Jameson, Tony, you want to go in that order?
Yeah, absolutely. At Derek Grant on Twitter, DerekGrant. Don't put an R in there. Derek R. Grant is the drummer in a satanic band called Alkaline Trio. He's not nearly as good at sales as I am, and I'm not nearly as good at rock solos as he is. And so make sure you get the wrong one, or the right one, or it'll be a weird conversation.
Yeah, Preston J. Clark on Twitter, pretty active there. LinkedIn. I'm at preston@everfi.com if you want to send me an email.
Jameson, you can try me on Twitter, but I'll never respond because I never check it. Jameson.young at gong.io. I also feel like I know the band Alkaline Trio, and I didn't know they were a satanic band, and so now I need to look into that after this call.
You learned something.
I learned something today. If I took one thing away.
There you go. That's your one takeaway. Great. Tony.
You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is spelled a little different, Tonni, so I'll probably be the only one that comes up. And on Twitter at Tony Bennett.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Gong, for hosting this webinar with us. Thank you all for speaking on this panel. It was fantastic. It will be recorded, posted on saleshacker.com. So if you are signed up for the webinar, you will get a link to the location on the site. You can share with your team and colleagues and everybody else. But that's it for this time. Thank you all. Did a great job.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks for tuning in.
Appreciate it, Max.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks, guys.